everyone, my name is Warda, and today I'm going to be going through how to get a level 9 and fully unlock your potential in the English language, especially for paper 2, section A. So for this paper, I'm going to share with you a couple of tricks and tips that I did and how I got a level 9, but also some methods of how to go through each question individually. So number one, I recommend you to really timestamp. So what does timestamp mean? So timestamping means that, say your exam begins at 11 o'clock in the morning, you're going to spend 10 minutes reading. So you're going to write down 11:10, reading time finishes. Why is this good? So there are a couple of reasons, but the main reason is because you don't want to apply your brain too much, thinking about other things like, oh, what time do I need to finish reading, whilst you're actually annotating, whilst you're going through, and whilst you're trying to analyze the text. And that goes for every question, because in English language and any English or any humanities type subject where you have to write a lot and it's easy to get carried away, it's very easy to get carried away with one question or carried away with reading or carried away with analysis and spend less time consequently on important questions which are coming up. So how do I timestamp? It's very easy. At the beginning of your exam, think about how much time are you going to spend on each question and how much time are you going to spend reading, and then just write down question 1, I'm going to finish at 11:20. Question 3, I'm going to finish at 11:25. This means that when it's 11:20, you're not thinking, oh, how much is 15 minutes from now? How much is 20 minutes from now? You're not calculating time whilst you're writing your answer. So that is really helpful, and I found that helpful not just for English but lots of subjects, and I even did it for maths and sciences, just a halfway mark timestamp, and that really helped. Okay, number 2, reading. So this is super important, and reading the extract. I think some people undermine the importance of actually reading the extract properly, and we just skim through the extract and we go straight onto the questions. And we think, oh, we're going to come back to this and I'm going to annotate it when I actually get asked about it in question 2 or question 3. But actually, I have found that reading the extract really impacts the quality of your writing and how much you read and understand it before you even get started on the questions. So I really recommend, especially for paper 2, because you get 2 sources, about 10 to 15 minutes of reading time. And this is how I would approach it. The first time, just read the extract for understanding. The second time, start reading the extract to try and understand what the concept and the deeper meanings are behind the extract. What is the author actually trying to say? What sort of deeper concepts, like life, like love, like death, like poverty, what sort of deeper concepts is the author trying to portray? What are the deeper concepts that the author is trying to convey through the extract? So even if the extract is about a cat sitting on a mat, there is a deeper concept, there is a deeper emotion. There's something deeper that the author is trying to convey through that. What is it? And what are they trying to convey? It might be portrayed through the characters, it might be portrayed through the setting change, it might be portrayed through language features, and that's for you to understand. And this reading time is for you to truly try and figure out, try and get an idea of what the deeper concepts are. And this is really what separates the higher level students from the lower level students. If you can understand what the deeper concepts are, what is the deeper message, then you are a higher level student, if you can express that properly. And if you can't, then your analysis is going to be quite lower level and it's going to be simple. So within this reading time, I'm going to give you a little demo of how to read it. So we have a look at this extract. This is from 2021. And this is about a little boy called Ugu. And this extract is very interesting. I really like this extract. It's about Ugu who's gone to a new city to work for his master. So if you just read it simply, you could just say, I'll give you a chance to read it yourself, because this is a revision video, so I don't want to spend too much time reading the extract. But you can find this for November 2021. This is the insert for Ugu from Chimamanda's novel, Half of a Yellow Sun. So once you've read the extract, I want you to think about what did you understand from the extract? You know, what's the main message? And first of all, you might think, oh, this is this little boy, he's gone to a city and he's going to work for his master. Okay, that's great. But what are the deeper concepts behind it? He's gone from a little village to a bigger city. He's thinking of all these opportunities and he's excited and perhaps overwhelmed by the level of opportunity that he foresees that is going to come. But is it really opportunity, or is it just a facade of slavery? So that's really one of the deeper concepts that you could touch upon. So this is sort of the idea that you can have. Now, how can I actually understand that? Sometimes it's quite hard to understand what are they trying to say. So what I like to do is I like to write down one word next to each paragraph to talk about the focus of the paragraph. So let's say this is about, what's this paragraph about? So this is about his aunt introducing his master to Ugwu, right? So master, aunt talking about master. So I'm just going to write that. Then next, what's this paragraph about? So this paragraph is about how, describing his master's luxury life, how he eats meat every single day, and in comparison, how, Ugwu is prepared to walk hours in the hot sun. So this really is comparing his master's life, master versus Ugwu, luxury versus poverty. See that? So we see that this paragraph is talking about his aunt introducing a master, then we already have a deeper concept. So once you've summarized a paragraph and you've written it down, then it's going to be a lot easier for you to actually find that section when you come back to it. Okay, so this is what I would do second. So the second time I read it, I write down the focus, and I also annotate anything that pops out to me as a structural or a language feature. So for example, let's see, anything that pops out. His new life. So I like this word, imagining his new life, and how it's not really reality, and how he's still quite delusionary, and he's still imagining what life would be like outside of his village. Whereas his master is quite, ate meat every day. It is a reality. He eats meat every day. It's not that he's imagining, he's eating meat every day. So you could compare that. But there's loads of techniques here which you can continue once you're reading. Just highlight and annotate, imagining what is that subject terminology. That's a dynamic verb, right? So I'm going to write down, or a verb. So dynamic verb. So I can analyze that later very quickly. And the total should take you, for source A and source B, 10 to 15 minutes max to read it once, and then to just go through, write down the focus of each paragraph and annotate your subject terminology. Okay, so let's get back. So we've talked about time stamping, we've talked about reading. What's next? So now we're going to go through the questions and how to attack the questions individually, okay? So this is just for section A. We'll do a separate video for section B because it's a different skill set. And this video would be too long otherwise. So let's have a look at question. Okay, so first of all, I think question 1 is quite simple, and it's a nice start to nice, easy 4 marks over here. I don't think we need to go over this too much, but just don't overcomplicate it. It's really easy. It's really simple. Just make sure that, you circle and do exactly what the question asks you to do. Avoid doing other things like crossing, ticking. Just shade the circles if it tells you to shade the circles. Okay, now question 2. So if we have a look at question 2, this is actually quite a different question to any question you've seen before in English language. You haven't really seen this type of question before in English language paper 1. So this is about summarizing. So what does summarizing mean? Summarizing means let me put that in capitals, no subject terminology. So that means you do not need to, and please do not put in adverbs, verbs, alliteration, metaphors, similes, because it doesn't ask you for the writer's methods. It asks you for a summary. So if it doesn't, if I don't do writer's methods, what do I do? Lots of people ask me that. So essentially, it's analysing. Actually, I'll correct that. It's not really analysing because they don't call it analysing, but it's comparing the messages, ideas, and experiences of source A versus source B. Now pay close attention to what the question asks you to do. They could ask you specifically to compare the similarities, they could ask you specifically to compare the differences, or they could just say, you know, compare a summary between the two. And so pay close attention to what the question asks you to do. So here they just ask you for a summary, so you can do similarities and differences for this question. So what you would do is, this is the method I use. So I do 2 paragraphs, and you do about, 2 paragraphs. So you do 1 comparative point, then you'd embed evidence. Note here, though, that the evidence does not need to come with subject terminology. So you just embed the evidence, then you do another comparative point, and then embed evidence, then another comparative point, and then embed evidence. So that's 1 paragraph, and you just repeat it again. Now, how do I get a level 9 for this? So the difference, as I said before, between a high grade student and a low grade student is that for level 9, and for the high grades, you will need to talk about more perceptive points. So not just basic points, comparing the two, like, oh, this guy has a sun hat and the other guy doesn't have a sun hat, because that's just talking about their physical appearance. What does that, what's the comparative perceptive point about that? Perhaps that source A is implying, you can use words like imply here because it's not an analysis. Don't use words like suggest here, but you can use words like implying, conveying, these sort of things. So while source A is implying that luxury is able to buy comfort, as the person in source A wears a sun hat, source B shows the life of poverty, and how, how the opposite is also true, how not having money also means less comfort and suffering from external causes like the hot sun. Okay, so I did the embedded quotes as well to show you where you need to embed your quotes. But if you have a look, a top tip I have for this is have a look at the mark scheme and look at the examples given for the different bands. Okay, so now let's move on to section 3. So question 3. Question 3, we have, this is essentially the same as your question 2 for English language paper 1, but this is 12 marks. So this is an extra 4 marks. So I recommend doing 3 PAL paragraphs, 4 here. Okay. P is for point, E is for evidence. There'll be a separate video. If you don't know what PAL means, there'll be a separate video for PAL. So A is for analysis, R is for reader response. So this is just a brief revision for my students, but if you don't know what PAL means, then there will be a separate video, but hopefully you've covered a similar structure to this in school, or you're familiar with a similar method to PAL. And if you're comfortable with that and it's working for you, please go ahead and use that method as well. But the idea is that it's 3 paragraphs with evidence analysis and link back to question and some reader response as well. So actually, although it says EA once in this paragraph, you should try to do at least 3 pieces of evidence. And some top tips for level 9. is make the quotes short. Okay, so make the quotes short. And I really emphasize this because in the mark scheme, if you see, they mark you higher for judicious and precise references. And what does that mean? That you're able to pick out short quotes and that you're able to pick out precise quotes. So 3 words max for each quote. So don't copy out whole sentences as your evidence, okay? And make sure, another thing, is that you really put in subject terminology for every single quote you do, because this question is testing your ability to analyze use of language. So what does that mean? Use of language devices. So what does subject terminology mean? Things like metaphors, similes, personification, but also nouns, adjectives, alliteration, all of this stuff. Anything that is language, any part of speech, any language device, like part of figurative language, anything like that is subject terminology. And what I really recommend for those aiming for the higher grades is putting the subject terminology before your quote. So for example, the alliteration, Milky Mars suggests. Okay, so you put the subject terminology before your actual quote, okay? Then if we have a look at the analysis will have a separate video for the analysis as well later. But for analysis, I do recommend that you have about 3 sentences of analysis per evidence. Okay. So really say, how does it show what you're saying it shows? Why does the author use this technique? Analysis is all about answering how and why. So don't be afraid to use because that's a really good word for analysis. And don't be afraid to use things like thus, therefore, consequently. These are good linking sentences for analysis as well. So 3 sentences of analysis, around 3 sentences per evidence, and you want 3 pieces of evidence. So eventually you'll have EA, another evidence to back up the same point, and then analysis, and then another evidence to back up the same point, and then analysis. Okay. Now, 3 paragraphs is what I recommend you do if you're running out of time. You're the best judge of your own time. Do not spend, 1 minute on another paragraph. If the next paragraph is going to be quality, then go ahead and do it. If you already have really 2 nice chunky paragraphs and you only have 1 minute left for this question, do not go on to do that paragraph, because it's not necessary you do 3 paragraphs. English is not about quantity, it's more about quality. But when I say that, please bear in mind that those 2 paragraphs should be quality in itself. But if you end up with this situation where you only have 1 or 2 minutes left for the next paragraph, I would say don't go on to the next paragraph if you can't execute it well, because it brings down, if 1 paragraph is bad quality and you have 2 really good quality paragraphs, then the last paragraph brings down the quality of your entire piece of work by quite a bit, so you don't want to do that. Okay. So now let's go on to the last question of this section. So question 4, you have comparing source A and source B, but you also have to analyze the methods here. So essentially, this is really interesting because you're combining the skills of both question 2 and the skills of question 3 into question 4. So you do the same sort of structure as question 3. You do 3 paragraphs, but instead of just leaving it there, I recommend, because it's 16 marks as well, you do a little conclusion. And when I say do a conclusion, it doesn't have to be 5 to 6 sentences, just 2 sentences is enough. And you can say, in conclusion, whilst source A presents whatever, what are they talking about? Attitudes to sweets here. And you can use the actual words of the question in your conclusion and in your links back to the question, okay? Well, source A presents attitudes to sweets as blah-de-blah-de-blah. Source B presents it in a whatever way you want to say it, presents it in. Now, how do I get a level 9 here again? It always depends on your quality of analysis, and it depends on your quality of your points, okay? So are you talking about perceptive things, or are you just talking about superficial things? So if you talk about really superficial things, what do I mean by superficial versus perceptive? So let me do a little table actually to show you what I mean by superficial versus perceptive, because this is pretty important. So this is essentially what distinguishes, you can see that I am a great artist at drawing tables, superficial versus deep or perceptive. So superficial basically means when you talk about things like, the physical appearance of things, when you just talk about explicit things, things that are really obviously said in the text. So for example, if the text said, Sam went to the shop and he bought an Apple pen, yeah? So if you just talk about, that's source A, and then source B could say, David went to the sweet shop and bought lots of sweets. So if you just talk about Sam going to the apple shop whilst David goes to the sweet shop, that's an explicit point because the extract clearly stated that, and that's what you're comparing, right? Whereas the more perceptive points are more implicit. You have to imply them. They're not just said, you've understood the text deeper and you've interpreted it, okay? So for example, if we now say, whilst Sam prefers to buy and invest in technology, we see that David is more consumed by his desires for the current world, and he likes to indulge in luxuries of the current moment, like sweets. Okay, whereas Sam could be using this technology for improving and using it for his future. For example, using it in projects, for example. Okay, so that's just an example. So it's more implicit, and you try and talk about the deeper points. So here are a couple of deep points, things like time, fate, life, death, changing relationships. Okay, so here are a couple of deep points over here. It's not necessary that all of these will be appropriate for your extract. You have to judge what sort of deep points, what's the deeper message in my extract and what's it trying to portray. Okay, so those who touch on these deeper points and analyze using these deeper points are more likely to get higher marks and more likely to get level 9. Okay. So that's the end of our review of section A of paper 2 English language, and whilst you have a few days left to actually revise, I really recommend that you go through each of the questions that we went through, apply the method, look at model answers, look at the model answers given by your exam board themselves. So here we talked about AQA. You can look on the mark scheme, and on the far right hand side of the mark scheme there are examples of the different different bands that students have achieved for writing in that style. And I really want you to practice the deeper concepts and the deeper ideas. Remember to timestamp, remember to use short quotes, and remember to analyze by saying how and why, fully, clearly, and deeply. So I hope this was really helpful. And if you have any questions at all, then feel free to get in touch.